start, the handling of protests and public gatherings by law enforcement in India has become a subject of increasing public and academic debate, particularly in light of several high-profile demonstrations that have occurred over the past decade. As the world's largest democracy, India guarantees its citizens the right to peaceful assembly and expression under Article 19 of the Constitution. But these rights are also subject to reasonable restrictions to maintain public order and ensure the safety of both protesters and the general public. The challenge for Indian law enforcement agencies lies in striking a delicate balance between upholding democratic freedoms and ensuring that public gatherings do not devolve into violence or create significant disruptions. With a population of over 1.4 billion people and diverse cultural, religious, and regional interests, protests in India are often multifaceted and can become emotionally charged. Recent events, such as the farmer protests against agricultural reforms and the nationwide protests against the Citizenship Amendment Act (CA), have highlighted both the importance of free expression in a democracy and the complexities law enforcement faces in managing mass gatherings. Law enforcement agencies, including the police and paramilitary forces, must be prepared to handle a wide range of scenarios, from peaceful sit-ins and marches to more contentious demonstrations that could potentially escalate into violence. Planning and preparation are crucial components of handling public protests in India. This involves collecting intelligence on the scale and nature of the protest, understanding the motivations and grievances of the demonstrators, and deploying sufficient personnel to maintain order. In cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, and Bangalore, where protests are frequent, police forces have developed specialized units trained in crowd control and riot management. The use of technology, such as drones for aerial surveillance and social media monitoring, has become increasingly common to track the movements of protesters and identify potential flashpoints. However, the use of surveillance tools must be carefully balanced with privacy concerns, as excessive monitoring can lead to accusations of state overreach. The use of force by law enforcement during protests is one of the most sensitive issues in India. The Indian Penal Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure outline the conditions under which force can be used, but these guidelines often leave room for interpretation. Non-violent methods, such as communication, negotiation, and the strategic use of barricades, are preferred. Yet, in situations where protests turn violent, police may resort to using tear gas, water cannons, or baton charges to disperse crowds. The use of such force has often been met with criticism, especially when it results in injuries or fatalities. The 2020 Delhi riots, for instance, led to widespread condemnation of the police response, with allegations of excessive and biased use of force. Similarly, during the farmer protests, there were accusations that water cannons and tear gas were used disproportionately, further straining relations between protesters and law enforcement. Addressing allegations of police bias and brutality is crucial for maintaining public trust. In India, where issues of caste, religion, and political affiliation are deeply intertwined, even the perception of partiality can erode trust in law enforcement. The police must be seen as impartial guardians of the law, and this requires comprehensive training in cultural sensitivity and human rights. Many civil society organizations and activists have called for reforms in police training to emphasize the importance of de-escalation techniques and the ethical use of force. They argue that a more community-oriented approach could help prevent confrontations and build trust between law enforcement and the public. The legal framework governing the use of force during protests also needs to be updated to reflect modern realities. The Colonial-Era Police Act of 1861, which still governs many aspects of policing in India, has been criticized for being outdated and overly focused on control rather than community engagement. There have been calls to replace it with a more progressive law that emphasizes accountability and the protection of human rights. Moreover, the National Human Rights Commission (NHRC) has played a vital role in investigating cases of police misconduct during protests and making recommendations for reform. Law enforcement agencies in India are increasingly using communication as a tool for managing protests. By engaging with protest organizers and establishing lines of dialogue, police can better understand the demands and intentions of the demonstrators. This approach has been used successfully in several cases where early communication and negotiation help de-escalate tensions and prevent violence. The Delhi police, for instance, have set up community liaison groups to foster better relations with local communities and ensure that protests can be conducted peacefully. However, communication is a two-way street, and law enforcement must also be willing to listen to the grievances of protesters with an open mind. Effective crowd management strategies in India also involve logistical planning, such as rerouting traffic, setting up medical aid stations, and ensuring that emergency services are on standby. Given the scale of protests that India often witnesses, especially in urban areas, coordination with municipal authorities and other emergency services is crucial. The use of force should always be a last resort, and officers are trained to prioritize the safety of all individuals, including protesters, bystanders, and fellow officers. The role of the judiciary in overseeing the conduct of law enforcement during protests is also significant. The Supreme Court of India and various high courts have intervened in several cases to uphold the rights of protesters while also ensuring that public order is maintained. For example, in the case of the Shaheen Bagh protests, the Supreme Court emphasized the need to balance the right to protest with the need to avoid public inconvenience. The court also underscored the responsibility of law enforcement to act fairly and proportionately. Despite these legal safeguards, there have been instances where the judiciary's directions were either not followed or misinterpreted, leading to calls for stricter oversight mechanisms. The increasing use of social media and real-time communication has added a new dimension to how protests are organized and managed in India. Platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and WhatsApp have become essential tools for mobilizing people and spreading information about protest locations and times.